Welcome, everyone. Today we're doing a really intense deep dive, I think. We're jumping straight into this fundamental tension,
Hmm.
between the kind of order we try to build in civilization and maybe these more primal forces,
Yeah.
aggression maybe, that
Hmm.
seem to be bubbling underneath.
Yeah, it's like a constant push and pull, isn't it? We're digging into the foundations, the rules, the whole structure.
And maybe uncover some uncomfortable truths along the way
Mm,
about what it actually takes to keep this civilized thing going.
absolutely. So, how are we approaching this?
Well, think of it like a philosophical debate. We've got two perspectives. Person A, let's say, is looking through a Freudian lens, very analytical.
Focused on morality, repression, culture, power,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. Provocative, maybe?
Exactly. Unafraid to poke at our assumptions. And then there's person B.
Okay.
Person B is, well, intellectually curious, always questioning, pushing back, wanting to see all the angles.
A skeptic, maybe?
Yeah.
Someone who challenges the neat answers.
Right. So the goal today is really to get beneath the surface. What's actually driving the engine of civilization behind the scenes?
Looking for those gut feelings, those intuitive hits about why we act the way we do.
Precisely. So let's get into it. Person A kicks things off with this pretty startling idea
You just...
that civilization, for all its focus on order and control, it's actually rooted in aggression.
Rooted in aggression. That seems paradoxical.
It is. Like, it's a massive collective defense mechanism against our own basic instincts.
Okay, that's fascinating. We build order out of chaos,
Mhm.
or the fear of chaos.
Sort of. And they use this analogy. Think about protest movements.
Okay, peaceful protests.
Often, yes. We see them as pushing for justice, peace, right? Banners, chants.
Uh-huh.
But person A says, look closer. Even demanding change peacefully often requires disrupting things, challenging authority directly.
So the act of demanding change itself has an aggressive edge, even if it's nonviolent.
That's the idea. It can be inherently confrontational, even necessary confrontation.
So progress isn't always gentle. Sometimes it needs that forceful element, breaking down old ways.
You got it. And this links straight back to Freud, doesn't it? This whole concept that culture, morality, law, religion, it's built by suppressing our individual desires.
It's like a grand bargain we all make, but maybe forget we made. Keeping certain urges under wraps.
Exactly. And sublimation, that's key here.
Absolutely key. Civilization doesn't just erase primal urges. It redirects them, like reprogramming that raw energy.
Turning potential destruction into cultural fuel.
Yeah, especially things like sex and aggression. Channeling them into art or work or sports. The drive's still there, just wearing different clothes, you could say.
But person A emphasizes there's a cost. This redirection, this suppression, it creates constant internal friction.
A battle inside between what society wants and what we maybe deep down crave.
Right. A pressure cooker situation almost. Never fully resolved.
Okay, so person B would naturally ask, where's the proof? Like concrete examples of morality being codified aggression.
Good question. And person A points to things like the Ten Commandments or Hammurabi's Code.
Ancient laws.
Yeah, but not just rules. See them as early systems for channeling aggression, structuring revenge almost. An eye for an eye wasn't just a saying, it was, well, organized retribution.
So it's taking that raw impulse for vengeance and putting it into a system, a predictable framework.
Exactly. And you can see echoes of that even now in modern legal systems.
That need for balance,
Yeah.
for punishment to restore something, is that a kind of collective venting of frustration, channeled aggression?
Person A would argue yes. It taps into that deep psychological need for things to be set right, which often involves, let's face it, some form of payback.
Okay, so if morality is one channel, person B then asks about power. What happens when aggression gets organized?
And person A's take is pretty blunt. Power is organized aggression in many forms.
Like what?
Think about hierarchies. Parent-child, teacher-student, government-citizen. Authority in these cases always has an element of coercion, doesn't it? The ability to enforce.
Yeah, you have to follow the rules, or else.
Right. And we justify it, maintain order, protect people, sure. But person A insists we remember the underlying force, the potential aggression.
It's a spectrum then. Legitimate authority versus, say, tyranny. Just a matter of degree.
That's the suggestion. The line can be thinner than we think.
Which leads person B to ask, okay, if aggression is so fundamental, why do we work so hard to deny it? Why pretend we're all just peaceful and rational?
And that's where the superego comes in, Freud's concept.
The internal judge and jury.
Exactly. That voice inside, constantly checking if we're following the rules, making us feel guilty if we stray. It's society's rules, but internalized. We become our own police.
And policing our own thoughts and actions. Wow. So we enforce conformity on ourselves.
We do. And the result of all that internal pressure? Repression.
You push the aggressive stuff down.
Right. But it doesn't vanish. It goes underground into the unconscious.
Yeah.
And it can, well, leak out.
Leak out how?
In distorted ways. Person A gives examples like the employee who can't yell at their boss, so they yell at their kids instead. Displacement.
Or maybe someone really ambitious, but they feel they can't show it, so it turns into anxiety.
Exactly. Or even bigger scale. Think about societies with really rigid moral codes suddenly erupting in violence. That repressed energy has to go somewhere.
Like a pressure valve finally blowing. Okay, so person B then connects this to another powerful drive, sexuality. How does that link with aggression?
Person A sees them as deeply intertwined. Both involve intense energy, right? A need for release. And both are heavily regulated by society.
True. The rules around sex, very complex, often unspoken.
And marriage, for instance. Person A sees it not just as romance, but also as a social structure, a way to channel that erotic energy, to keep things stable.
But again, the potential cost. If
Yeah.
those drives, sex or aggression, are too tightly controlled.
Then you get dissatisfaction, guilt, maybe even behavior society labels as perverse. It's the trade-off for order.
Okay, interesting shift now. Person B asks about creativity, art, music. How does aggression fit in there? That seems counterintuitive.
Well, person A suggests creativity actually springs from that tension between desire and restriction.
Because we can't always act directly on impulses.
Exactly. So we find other ways, we transform them, sublimate them.
Ah, sublimation again. So it's not just a limitation, it's a catalyst. It forces innovation.
Kind of. You take the raw stuff, maybe dark fantasies, intense feelings, and you reshape it into something beautiful or meaningful, but you sacrifice the immediate release.
Like an artist pouring rage onto a canvas. Or a musician turning heartbreak into a song.
Perfect examples. That creative act needs that raw energy to fuel it, even if the source is uncomfortable.
So this brings us deeper into Freud's core ideas, Eros and Thanatos.
Right. The life instinct and the death drive. But person A stresses they're not just opposites fighting, they're intertwined, woven together.
Shaping us individually and shaping our cultures collectively.
It's this constant dance. The drive to connect, to create live Eros, bumping up against the impulse towards conflict, destruction, maybe even self-destruction, Thanatos.
And it's not just abstract theory. You see it in basic behaviors.
Totally. Think of a toddler's tantrum, that raw outburst. Person A sees that as Thanatos in miniature. Unmet desire, frustration, the struggle for autonomy.
And growing up, socialization is basically learning to manage that, to sublimate those raw feelings.
Exactly. Learning to behave in acceptable ways. But the energy itself, it doesn't just disappear.
Which leads back to person B's question. What happens to it? That original aggressive impulse.
Person A says it transforms. It finds new outlets. Competitive sports, for instance.
Channeling aggression within rules.
Or entrepreneurial drive. Building an empire, disrupting markets. Sometimes called creative destruction.
Yeah, okay. Or even artistic creation, as we said. Taking that energy and making something new.
But there's always that trade-off. Person A points out, we trade some authenticity, maybe some raw freedom.
For acceptance, for belonging.
Seems like it. It's the price of admission to the group.
Okay, so let's circle back to this idea of civilization built on repression. What does that mean day to day?
Well, person A reiterates, living together peacefully seems to require giving up certain freedoms, following the rules, and we internalize those rules via the super-ego.
That inner critic again, always judging, causing guilt, shame.
Making us feel like we're never quite good enough. It's a constant internal conflict.
Sounds exhausting.
Can be. But person A argues, look, however oppressive it feels sometimes, that self-regulation is probably necessary. Otherwise, chaos.
A necessary evil? Maybe. So person B wonders about history. Can we see this dynamic playing out historically?
Person A points straight to religion as a huge, powerful system for managing aggression.
How so?
Through rituals, doctrines, commandments, think of confession, penance in medieval times, ways to acknowledge and redirect those darker impulses within a structure.
Giving them a place to go safely.
Arguably. And then there's the less comfortable example, warfare. Often framed, historically, as a sanctioned outlet for collective aggression. Thanatos let loose on an enemy directed outwards.
And even when there isn't war.
Well, person A mentions things like intense nationalistic sports rivalries or fierce corporate competition. peacetime militarism, almost,
Yeah.
still channeling that competitive, aggressive energy.
How stable is all this repression? Person B asks. Can you really keep a lid on it forever?
Person A's answer is basically no. Eventually, repressed stuff finds a way out, often explosively.
Like revolutions.
Exactly. Think of the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, maybe even the Civil Rights Movement in some ways. Periods of intense pressure followed by massive release, massive upheaval.
And on a personal level, if sublimation fails.
That's where person A brings in neurosis, anxiety, depression, OCD. Freud saw these as symptoms of unresolved internal conflicts. The id, ego, superego wrestling match going badly.
So mental health issues can be the result of this failed repression.
That's the Freudian view. Even physical symptoms sometimes. The body expressing what the mind can't or won't.
Wow. And what about things like, I don't know, horror movies or extreme sports?
Person A sees those as potential modern safety valves. Ways to explore fear, aggression, taboo feelings vicariously in a controlled way.
Releasing the pressure without actually breaking the rules.
Maybe. But person B then raises a really important moral point. If we're just redirecting aggression, are we solving anything? Or just finding safer targets?
Yeah, that's tricky. Does sublimation just make oppression more socially acceptable sometimes?
Person A argues it can blur the lines. You redirect aggression onto a group that society deems okay to target. Think about historical justifications for colonialism or scapegoating minorities.
So the system that maintains order can also perpetuate harm. That's the paradox.
Absolutely. Civilization needs aggression, fears aggression, tries to control it. But the control systems themselves can cause suffering. And trying to control human nature, person A suggests that's inherently unstable. More control might just breed more resistance.
Which leads person B to this really heavy thought. Is civilization itself kind of a wound we inflict on ourselves?
Person A doesn't disagree. They might use Freud's idea of culture as a garrison state. We trade freedom for security, but maybe the garrison becomes a prison.
And guilt. Is that the tool used to keep us in line?
A key psychological tool, yes. Enforcing conformity. And the irony person A points out is that suppressing desires can actually make them stronger. This cycle of wanting and denying.
So when we see those moments of upheaval, revolutions, big social changes,
Person A describes them as Thanatos breaking through, collective rage erupting after being contained for too long.
but often don't those revolutions just lead to new forms of control, new kinds of oppression?
That's the sobering observation. It suggests the fundamental conflict isn't really resolved, just rearranged.
Which brings it right back to us.
Yeah.
Person B asks, what's our role in all this as individuals?
And person A says, look, just condemning aggression doesn't put you outside the system. We're all in it.
How so?
We reinforce the moral codes, consciously or not. We demand justice, which usually involves punishment, a form of aggression. We strive for peace, often by suppressing conflict rather than resolving it. We're complicit.
Oof. That's uncomfortable. So person B thinks about order itself. How fragile is it really?
Person A sees it as inherently fragile because it's built by repressing not just aggression, but doubt, uncertainty, dissent, anything that threatens the structure.
And suppression can only hold for so long.
Right, so when it bursts, it's transformative. Destruction clears the way for new creation. That's Thanatos again, but maybe with a hidden creative purpose.
Which leaves person B grappling with a huge question, especially if you want to keep things stable. Does trying to maintain order just stifle necessary change? Or does it just delay the inevitable breaking point?
It's a massive philosophical question. No easy answer there.
So as we wrap this up, we're left with civilization as this incredibly complex, paradoxical thing.
Person A sums it up as maybe a masterpiece, but maybe also a mirage. Huge benefits, yes, but at a potentially massive unseen cost.
And we're all part of it, every day. Through the rules we follow, the rituals we perform, the desires we push down, we keep the cycle going.
Yeah, and the real question isn't how do we escape? Maybe it's how do we live within this more consciously?
Understanding our own roles as both. Products of the system and contributors to it. Victims and perpetrators, maybe, in small ways.
Exactly, and that's the challenge for you listening, to ask yourself, where do my own aggressions go, my own desires?
Am I part of maintaining things as they are? What's the cost of that? Do I genuinely want freedom, or is the structure safer, more comfortable?
These aren't easy questions. They're really invitations to look inward, deeply.
Because at the end of the day, this struggle person A describes between creation and destruction, Eros and Thanatos, it's not something to be solved.
It's maybe something to be embraced, or at least acknowledged, as part of being human, part of being civilized, interconnected in this whole complex web